Welcome to VLearn Virtual Learning Network. This is session number 12 of Social Problems in India and the topic is children labor. Topics to be covered are definition, estimates, literacy level and social background, causes and conditions of child labor, constitutional provisions and government policies, challenges of meeting the basic needs of children. Definition, estimation, literacy level and social background. Now come to the definition according to the Census of India. Definition: a child worker is one who works for the major part of the day and is below the age of 14 years. There is no agreement about the definition of the child. The 1989 UN Conventions on the Right of the Child sets the upper age at 18 and the International Labour Organization refers to children as those who are under 15 years, and in India children above the age of 14 years are old enough to be employed. Estimates of child labor vary widely. Children work participation is higher in the less developed regions of the world than these of the more developed ones. While in 2000 the world average of the child work participation rate was 11.3%, their participation rates in the less developed regions and the least developed countries were 13% and 31.6% respectively. Child work participation has been eliminated from the more developed regions of the world, and in India in 2000 child work participation was 12.1%. As indicated, there are varied estimates on child labor in India. The UNDP estimate says that there are more than 100 million child labor in India, of which around 1 billion work as bounded labor. According to another estimate by Asian Labour Monitor, every third household in India has a working child in the age group of 5 to 14. It is thus very difficult to arrive at correct estimates of child labor because of wide variations in different studies. A large number of child workers are in the informal sector and many are self-employed on family farms and enterprises. The work participation rate of children in rural areas is 3 times more than in urban areas. Child labor make a very significant contribution in arid and semi-arid areas where families have to use maximum resources in traditional rain-fed farming systems for about 3 to 4 months during the rainy season. A lot of child labor is used in collection of goods with fuel, fodder, minor, forest produce, etc. Child labor is an integral part of farmers' adaptive methods to cope with seasonal demand for labor. These situations usually do not encourage the children to go to school for studies, and this is more so for the female children. Literacy rate in rural areas: only 4.1% boys and 2.2% girls child workers were literate. Similarly, in urban areas, 7.0% boys and 2.5% girls child workers were literate. The main reason for not sending these children to school is the opportunity cost to parents who lose the wages earned by the children. Socio-economic background: the problem of poverty in India has been described in terms of social classes and caste. In rural areas, landless agriculture laborers, marginal landholders, and artisans constitute poor households. Landless laborers mostly belong to scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. In urban areas, the poor people live in slums or in temporary hutments or on pavements. The problem of poverty in India has also been discussed in terms of its magnitude. Example, according to official figures, about 40% people in India live in abject poverty. Rural poor unable to earn a living often migrate towards in search of work. Child labor is used as a survival strategy by poor households. Thus, India has the largest child labor force in the world. Rural areas children work as wage earners, as self-employed workers and as unpaid family helpers. In rural areas, children are often employed for grazing cattle, in agriculture activities, in home based industries. The National Sample Survey Organization, that is NSSO, analysis shows that the prevalence of child labor across India is related to proportion of scheduled caste population, low level of female literacy, low wage rates for adult workers, nature of size of land holdings, and the last one is home based production. Higher wage rate for women had correspondingly lower participation of girls as they were retained by their families for domestic work. Hence, the NSSO study also suggested that improving the working conditions of adult women and providing alternatives to employment of children can reduce child labor, and various studies have shown that number of children workers is large in rural areas, and most of the child workers are concentrated among the landless agriculture households, in agriculture, in livestock activities, and in home based enterprises. The demand for child labor is also determined by culturally prescribed division of labor by age and gender. Girls in the age group of 10 to 14 work much harder than boys. In urban areas, children work as wage earners in small industries and workshops such as bindi match and fireworkers, glass in bangles, carpet weaving, handloom, gem polishing, potteries, paper bags, plastic goods, and fish processing. Matchmaking and fireworks industries have a large incidence of working children of a very young age, and they also work at construction sites, stone quarrying, or in loading or unloading operations. They serve tea and food in dhabas and restaurants, sell vegetables and milk, work as domestic servants, car cleaners, newspaper vendors. Children from slums also work as potters and casual workers. Children in both rural and urban areas work as unpaid family helpers in employees' homes, in contact work done by families on piece rate basis, or in families' own farms or small enterprises. The child gets no recognition of money for the work done at home. Usually, the work done at home is considered to be less exploitative, but many a time child abuse and long hours of work in difficult conditions take place within the family. Most of the child labor of our country are in situation in which they are forced to work. They have to work not for their own survival alone, but also for the survival of members of their family. However, they have to work in very unhealthy and insecure work conditions, which are detrimental to the total growth of a human being. They mostly remain illiterate and are sickly built. Today's children are tomorrow's citizens of the nation. Indeed, they are likely to grow up as illiterate, frustrated, and unhealthy citizens. Every state, as a welfare institution, undertakes some measures for the prohibition of child labor as also for the well-being of the children. In post-independent India, several institutional initiatives have been undertaken to deal with the issues of children. Constitutional provisions, prohibition and regulations of child labor has received considerable attention in the last few decades. The Constitution of India in Article 24 provides that no child below the age of 14 years shall be employed in any factory or mine or be engaged in any hazardous employment. Article 39 E and F of the Directive Principle of State Policy requires the state to ensure that the healthy and strength of workers, men, women, and tender age of children are not abused, and children are given opportunities and facilities to develop in a healthy climate and protected against exploitation. Committee on Child Labour. The report of the National Committee of Labour and the report of the Committee of Child Labour examined the causes and consequences of child labour in India. Following the report of the Committee on the Child Labour, the government appointed a special central advisory board on child labour under the Ministry of Labour. The board reviews the implementation of existing legislations and suggests further legal and welfare measures. It also identifies industries, occupations where child labor needs to be eliminated. Now, legislations on child labor. The Indian Factories Act 1881 prescribed the minimum age for employment as 7 years and the working hours not exceed 9 hours. The Factories Act 1948 prohibits employment of children below the age of 14 years. The Child Labour Act 1986 is first comprehensive legislation which prohibits employment of children below 14 years and in some cases 15 years in the organized industries and in certain hazardous industrial occupations like bindi and carpet making, cloth dyeing, weaving, manufacturing of matches, explosives and fireworks, soap, manufacturing, leather, tanning and building and construction industry. Now, problems of implementation. The government subscribes to the view that child labor cannot be abolished but can only be regulated. The 1986 Act is totally inadequate to deal with the problem of children labor as they are rooted in poverty. The 1986 Act prohibits use of child labor in hazardous occupations and processes. Employers bypass the legislation by either not maintaining the muster role of framing out work to smaller units or to home-based workers. Now, most of the children work in small industries which are not covered by legislation. Several investigative reports and documentaries have highlighted the abuse of child labor in glass and bangles industry in Firozabad, match and fireworkers industry in Sivakasi, carpet weaving industry in Mirzapur, etc. Recently, in the landmark judgment, the Supreme Court put a ban on the employment of children. Challenges on meeting the basic need of children. The UN Conventions on the Right of Child sets universal legal standards of protection of children against neglected, abuse and exploitation at work as well as guarantees them basic human rights. The convention contains 54 articles which cover children's civil, economic, social, cultural and political rights. The theme for the International Years of the Child was Reaching the Deprived Child. Children are the starting point of any development strategy. The Government of India's national policy on children emphasized that children are a nation's supremely important asset and declared that the nation is responsible for their nature and solicitude. Despite these policy measures, the infant mortality rate in India remains very high. Child mortality rates are higher for girls due to neglect and discriminatory treatment in terms of food, nutrition and health care. More girls than boys drop out of school or are not enrolled from low income groups as a girl child labor is needed by the family to release her mother's work time. The SAARC countries had declared the 90s of decades the girl child to achieve a universal coverage of education and health services for children and ensure their survival, growth and development. Hence, effective economic and social policies are needed for the low income groups to bring about a significant improvement in the quality of life. Women and children welfare is never high on the agenda of national governments. Sustained political will and united action is required by the government, international agencies, and non governmental organizations to ensure the protection and development of children. Now, there are some questions on the basis of this session. First is write in a few words about national policy resolutions for children. Second is briefly state the types of work done by child workers as paid workers in urban areas. That's it for this session. Thank you. Happy learning, be learning.